of cinema. Top 3 choices from Citizen Kane to Jeanne Dielman, 23, quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. That was my impression of Alfred Hitchcock. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Days with Moire episode of the year. Isn't that crazy? We are on season 4. Season 4 of this channel.
Isn't it hilarious that you just butchered that full title when you're literally the French Canadian? Jesus.
Well, I mean, I failed in French, so what can I say? In case I wasn't enough.
So you just suck at everything.
We begin. Well, yeah, I know. I don't know why you guys put up with me. I'm your shitty, awful host.
Monolinguals.
No. All in good fun, my friend.
I am your shitty, awful host, Ian Taylor. Joining me tonight are two people that think they're better than me. My co-host, musician, and artist, Devin Kane. Robert Pattinson's here tonight. No. And also, usual guest, American filmmaker Stephen Beeson. How are you guys doing tonight? It's the first episode of the year.
This is crazy. I'm doing great. Although Ian, I have to say your inferiority complex is showing. I had to work on that.
Yeah, just try jerking yourself off a little more.
Oh, so do that on the podcast. Is what you're saying. And it'll be good.
Exactly.
How many times a week?
Okay. No, after many delays and much trial and tribulation, we are back into the show in the year 2023. We had a planned episode just before Christmas, which ended up falling through. I think everyone's been kind of swamped by the holidays, and so it's been a long time coming. And we finally came full circle. We're back on a Tuesday.
Well, and I will apologize for my part in that. I'm a busy guy. Aside from doing my independent film stuff, which you can see on YouTube, Hopeless Romantic Short Film. Is the title you'll probably find it under. We won the what was it? Best Actor at the Art is Alive Film Festival in New York. We won the finals in Austin after dark. It's had a very successful run. Humble brag.
Shameless plug.
Who's jerking off now?
Exactly. Well, Devin was talking about a long time coming. No, but no. In all seriousness, I mean, aside from that, I've also been in the process of moving into my first apartment. Lots of exciting stuff going on my way, and new changes, and really, when you think about change, you think about a new year, a fresh start, and so this was kind of something that we had talked about for a while. Was doing a month where the theme is life, rebirth, and death. And so originally we had talked about, doing that in a more literal sense. We were going to talk about, Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, some films like that. And I do believe that we should look at those films, but kind of what became this running joke was, well, the life episode would be some of the best films ever made. And what better, let's stay topical, with the Sight and Sound poll. And so this is our best episode. And then later in the month, we'll be looking at our not so best episode. And we'll kind of talk about that later. This episode, we'll kind of plug that. But yeah, no, I mean, I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but just to say, this is an exciting episode. We're so excited also to provide another year of content to all three of the people who listen to us.
Exactly. But hey, this year it's going to be 4 people.
Exactly. Yes. We got to pump those numbers up.
Exactly.
And if we're lucky enough, we might even have 5.
Devin, that's crazy talk. That's incredibly ambitious.
6.9.
That's
Wow.
maybe a little too ambitious, much like the first filmmaker we're talking about tonight.
Oh, great
What?
segue.
That's a great segue. Damn.
Thanks. I have one
Citizen
cynic blue moon.
Kane. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you were saying?
Oh no, I said once in a blue moon. I have a good idea. It's
Fair enough. So the first film that we're talking about tonight is a film that almost needs no introduction. Hence, I volunteered to do it. But this
easy
is
day.
this is Orson Welles' debut film, Citizen Kane from 1941, that has often been heralded as a classic and one of the greatest American films ever made. It's been on the top 100 lists for over like 50 years, and it's always been tossed around since its release, um, and made a splash onto the scene as one of the greatest films ever made. And with a film with that kind of notoriety, it's really hard to go into this thing with kind of a fresh perspective or really like you feel like there's a certain expectation that needs to be met when it is the quote greatest film all the time. And many people that are watching this film for the first time might look at this and not understand and not get what the whole humdrum is about, or really maybe not feel a connection to it. I will say I did see this film kind of on my own um, fruition. It wasn't just from film school that I had seen it. Um, Actually, no, I think that's a total lie. I think I did watch it because of film school, but I was like, I really felt an odd personal connection to the film, outside of the great expectations kind of surrounding it. I guess as someone that kind of over collects things, it's made me kind of reflect on
Would
the
would you would you say Citizen Kane is literally you?
well, you fucked up my joke that I was building up to. God damn it! I was
Sorry,
about to
man.
call Kane the first literally me character, but
Oh, we're off
oh
to a
fuck!
great start.
You completely fucked up my joke. This is the thing. We have so many like common inside jokes
We're
that are
really off
derivative
to a
of
great
all
start here.
of the
God
fucking
damn.
memes. Like this is the problem, is that we don't have any original jokes. We just regurgitate shit from all the film broke
G'day.
meme pages, and we just recycle
How did
material.
how did
Anyway,
we keep
I,
getting away with it? I don't know.
I was fuck off. Anyway, I had a more sincere point I was gonna get to
I'm
there,
sorry.
and I was gonna build it up to a joke. Completely fucked up my whole formula.
God
I'm
damn,
sorry.
this is a fresh cut, man. This is what we get for doing live improv. Holy shit, man.
Well, that's kind of the beauty and the horror at the same time. But
Now you know how
where
I
the fuck
feel as
was
a
I
dungeon
going with
master.
that?
Go
So
on.
I know this film, to me, is a really great product of. There's a lot of things that people say about it. I'm just going completely off the cuff. I didn't read too much about going in. I'm just bringing
Okay.
up stuff that I half remember. But I do think that this film is a great product of kind of capitalism. You can take from that what you will. It just shows like what a mass of wealth can do to a person who's trying to reconnect with something very simple. And when you kind of whittle down like a person's character flaw to a single word, it's very effective writing. And yeah, I mean, there's so much that's been said about that, but I did feel a personal connection from this, and I do think it's not because I'm like a wealthy newspaper tyrant, but I think just as a product of the mass abundance that we have in society, it's very easy to get lost in collecting shit, and this is something that I've had to work on over the years, basically getting rid of things I don't need, and before you know it, I'm lost in my own Xanadu. So. Anyway, that was my personal connection to this film. I had a much more nuanced and thought-provoking point to bring up there, perhaps, but it completely got shanghaied by Mr. Beast over here,
Jesus Christ.
which is
What?
another plug for a different Orson Welles film.
Yeah, yeah, very very clever. I see what you did there.
Nice.
No, so I have a confession to make. This is the first time I've seen this film.
Dude.
I feel
Cinematic. Sorry.
I I honestly feel pretty bad about it. I'm kicking myself that I didn't see it sooner. Um, I mean, kind of going off what you were saying, Devin. Citizen Kane is it's ingrained so much into the zeitgeist that it has crossed over. Like when we've talked about films, not quite to this level, but we've talked about iconic films on the podcast, whether that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've talked about The Matrix. We've talked about The Godfather. Those are films that have entered the zeitgeist in the way that, and I've talked about this too. It's like with Casablanca. It's like I
Hmm.
felt like I had seen that film before I actually saw it because it's so plugged into the human consciousness. Like we as a collective society have all in some way or another seen that through parody or through homage or some
Oh
way
yeah.
we're familiar with it.
I remember very distinctly finding out about this movie title wise from a fucking Simpsons Treehouse of Horror skit. It was called
No, no,
like
exactly. And that's the thing. Like Citizen Kane even transcends just that because like Citizen Kane is a part of our vocabulary.
Yeah.
Like we can people that go to a movie will say shit like, "Well, I mean, it was okay. I mean, I wasn't expecting Citizen Kane."
Yeah,
Like
or you see
that's
like
the
video
kind of
games being like, oh, The Last of Us is like the Citizen Kane of video games, so it's crossed like different forms of
it's like
mediums.
short form for this unobtainable height of notoriety. It's like the
Uh huh.
greatest thing ever, which is ironic because it's like the film itself, plot wise, is almost like this lost, unobtainable, like height of happiness, like the whole thing with Rosebud, which we'll get into. Um, I'm actually just rewatching that last scene. I had it just playing in the background here, but man, what a poignant metaphor for like loss of innocence.
Absolutely.
That is. Um,
no, and I think this film is brilliant. And like I said, I'm kicking myself for not seeing it sooner. I mean, if you go on YouTube right now and type in Citizen Kane review, this is something that we'll do. Not that it really colors our ideas or thoughts or feelings about a particular work of art, but I mean, I can speak for myself in saying that I always do that as a means to kind of see how off base my interpretation of it is. Am I with the like going current consensus? And just for kind of like shits and giggles, because I want to know, is there something that I'm missing? Is there something that I'm keyed into that maybe other people aren't, or maybe I'm not? And I remember when I watched Citizen Kane, I was like absolutely floored, and then I went to YouTube sometime later, and I was looking up reviews, and the American Film Institute has posted these videos of filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, filmmakers like Steven Spielberg and William Friedkin, and people like Jeff Bridges, who are all just gushing about this film and what it meant to them. And, it's honestly trying to talk about this film on the podcast. It's intimidating, but it's also like it's special that you get to be a part of something like that.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I mean it is. It's a film that's reputation absolutely precedes it in pretty much every way imaginable.
Yeah. I feel the same way about this movie that I do with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Even though they're very different genres, I feel like it's a similar zeitgeist where even if you haven't seen the movie, you've definitely seen the movie because of how it's worked its way around pop culture. And the feeling is, while I definitely don't think it lives up to the catastrophic hype that it's received over the years. But at the same time, like, I get it. I definitely get like what the hype is all about. Like, it's incredibly ambitious, especially for the time. On a technical level, it's just perfect. Like there are some transitions that are just pure movie magic, and it is like a compelling mystery with a good solid twist and a lot of themes that have aged very well throughout the years. And like it's Citizen Kane. It does its job. It does it well, and it doesn't take too long doing it. And yeah, maybe it doesn't really resonate with me beyond that personally, but it doesn't really need to for me to appreciate it. And it's maybe there are parts of it where I certainly appreciate it more than I love it, but I can't really think of anything that's objectively wrong with it beyond the fact that I just can't connect with it as much as other people. And I'd say that's pretty nitpicky for a film that came out in 1941.
Oh yeah, I mean the fact that we are even still talking about a film like this, and this isn't some obscure kind of film we're digging up, just shows, you know, it's really indicative of its staying power. And like the cinematography and all these techniques were absolutely like fresh at the time, and they were hugely influential. And I think it's lost on a lot of people like these days, especially kids like growing up. Like I remember, being younger, if I saw like black and white films, I immediately had like an aversion to that just because it wasn't something I was used to seeing. And it was like a technical limitation at the time. But the way he got the camera to really move and explore through the space, like he was talking to a cinematographer. Like the cinematographer that he worked with is someone that was, you know, didn't give a fuck really about what the conventions were, but he was very skilled and masterful, and Orson enabled him to really be very inventive with the way they move the camera around. And it's like that became so influential, even though it was so daring, that a lot of the techniques they almost established, these like crazy camera moves, are almost standard practice today. And so people, when they see those kind of images, that's like nothing new to them. It feels like a very modern film, but for the time, it's absolutely very revolutionary. So much so that today it just looks like standard practice filmmaking almost.
Yeah, and just like the amount of like heavy dark shadows was something that normally wouldn't fly back in the day. Like you gotta remember, guys, this is pre-film noir. This is pre Double Indemnity. This is pre. I think it's pre Casablanca, if I'm not mistaken. So you did not shoot a film like this. You did not like shoot it in a way where you can barely make out like certain scenes and certain characters. But
Well,
yeah,
they also did a lot of deep focus photography, which
yeah.
light, which you really need a lot of light on set to actually achieve, where you actually stop down the lens where just about everything in the shot is in focus from a kind of wide perspective. You really need to pump that set full of light, especially on that old school kind of film stock. It was not
Well,
very light
and
sensitive at all.
I will say, I mean, I kind of agree with Ian. I can't believe I'm saying this. I don't know. It's simply because the expectations are so high. I
Hmm.
don't know if it ever quite lives up to that because the thing is, and I've kind of talked about this with The Exorcist too. I was talking about William Friedkin earlier, and it's like the way that The Exorcist was marketed at the time. You're not going to go to a movie. You're not seeing a film about a priest and a possessed little girl. The way that movie was marketed was you are going to experience the devil, right? And I feel like Citizen Kane, by contrast, even like the contemporary reviews, are similar in that, like, you're not going to see this movie about this newspaper magnate. You are going to be transported to this other planet. Like, you're experiencing something, you're going to reach this level of nirvana. And suddenly, when you get there, how to make the perfect film is just going to click. It's like you've been handed the keys to the kingdom. And I don't know. That is such an expectation to
Such a high
set, and
bar.
Hmm.
it's such a high bar, and it's hard to, especially today, this many years later, the way that it's been talked about. It's hard to not have that color your experience in some way or another. And so I don't know if it ever clears quite that high bar. Um, you know, I, I,
For you?
I don't know. But for what it's worth, I don't want to give the impression that this film was in any way a disappointment or I didn't
Oh, no,
love it,
no.
because
Hmm.
I think it's brilliant. I think it is a testament to what you can achieve, especially for this being a debut filmmaker. I mean, this guy was 25 years old.
Yeah.
I'm 27. I can't imagine making something this good on my first
It's
Well,
insane.
try.
I feel like we need to lay some groundwork here. So Orson started uh, getting notoriety. Well, he really splashed onto the scene with his War of the Worlds radio podcast.
Yeah.
I almost said podcast. That's
Radio
goddamn.
podcast.
Well, you're half right.
Imagine
Right.
Orson Welles on Joe Rogan.
Oh God. I misspoke, but anyway, so like he did this whole radio show of War of the Worlds, and the way he did it, actually convinced some people that a real alien invasion was happening, which was kind of
Yes.
a viral sensation for the time, although the term obviously wasn't used. Although those reports were obviously kind of exaggerated to a certain extent, but that's how he started gaining notoriety. And the reason he was confident enough to take on a film like this, according to him, was sheer ignorance. He didn't know better in a sense. But I
Yeah.
think it's like this brilliant level of ignorance that he kind of came into it like, yeah, I can do this thing, why not? And I think you need a little bit of that to, make a film like this. Although when kind of reports of that have come out when he spoke about this, I feel like a lot of people who become first time filmmakers really get that in their head of, oh, I should be an ignorant, asshole to get what I want.
Yeah.
um, yeah, yes, but no. Um,
Well,
Well, you kind
I
of need to be overambitious to make a film like this because that's exactly what it's about. It's about a man that flew too close to the sun and he inevitably paid the price while begging to go back to a simpler life
mhm.
afterwards.
and
Like, you
what's
kind
and,
of
and what's
have that
ironic
mentality.
is, and even though Orson Welles has made a lot of great films since, they never reach this same height. And if you see him like later in his career doing like acting roles, you can tell he's like old
Finding
man
in.
yells at cloud. Like
Yeah.
it's like it kind of insists upon itself, or it's like a metaphor for itself, which is the most ironic thing of the whole film. And it's almost like he laid out the map of his career with this movie, um,
Mhm.
for better
Yeah,
or for
like
worse.
he probably like this probably fried his brain to the point where like Touch of Evil's really good. Lady from Shanghai's okay. The Third
I
Man's
really
great,
like
but he
that one.
didn't direct it. Yeah, it's okay. I never need
I
to hear him do an Irish accent again.
true. I really liked F for Fake. I would highly recommend that film,
Need to
and we
see
should
it.
definitely review it sometime. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's
Um,
no,
supposed to be really good.
absolutely. Yeah, I
Well, the
agree.
thing is, like Orson Welles is just such a charismatic character. Like the guy
mhm.
just oozes charisma.
and
And,
and and and
yeah,
his and that charisma is what got him these acting roles. Like he
yeah,
basically lied and swindled his way into these higher
yeah.
echelons by
The irony. Yeah.
just being so charismatic that people just believed his word for things. Or when I can't remember if he said he actually faked a resume to get into acting, but I mean it worked, I guess.
So what you're saying is he pulled the parasite to get into acting.
more
Well,
more
I
more or
mean,
less before that was a thing.
and I mean, especially later in his career, I mean, he did almost become someone who was, how do I phrase it? I don't want to say exactly in on the joke, but I mean, when you're doing stuff like the Muppet movie or History of the World Part One, I mean, I
Transformers.
admire that
Yeah.
he had. Well, I admire he had such a good sense of humor about it. But yeah, I mean, the thing about this film, I mean, really, and I know I keep bringing up William Friedkin, but I saw an interview with him, and he was talking about um, that there are three films that have come out more than any other film that have revolutionized the way that we edit films, which I think is a discussion in and of itself because the editing in this film is absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
The way that certain shots are framed and cut, it's unheard of almost even today. And what Friedkin was saying, it's like there's 1915's Birth of a Nation,
Oh.
and there's Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. Now, maybe not the best films of all time. I mean, particularly Birth of a Nation, but it's like those are by far the most important as far as the way that we
Yeah, I guess.
communicate a story visually. And I think that's fascinating. I mean,
It is. Now,
yeah.
one thing that a lot of reviews do, they talk around the film and kind of the legacy of it and the technical stuff, and that's all very, important stuff to
Oh,
talk
sure.
about. But when it comes to these films, I really like to get to the heart of kind of the storytelling
Yeah,
and the way
absolutely.
that it unfolds, because that's something
Absolutely.
that a lot of people seem to kind of ignore. But I think what really motivates or really perpetuates this story forward more so than a lot of other films coming out at the time is that there's this question set up at the beginning, and it's like they're trying to figure out what rosebud means, and it's this question that you try to understand throughout the course of the film, and people kind of unbury that lead. Like they bring up rosebud as like the main selling point almost. But it is this question that's kind of asked throughout the film, and when you have that question in your mind, it keeps you intrigued in the story unfolding. And I think it's that momentum in the writing that really gives this film that motivation and makes you really want to learn more. And I love that like crux in the writing. It's also the biggest flaw of the movie. In that, how the fuck did they know what his last word was?
Yeah, he dies
Well,
alone.
a maid heard him say it. They established that a maid heard him say it.
They don't show the maid
They don't
anywhere near
show the
that.
maid, but it was implied
I
that like a maid
Well,
heard him
no,
say it.
you see the maid reflected on the snow globe, which is actually a really cool shot. I love that shot. But
God,
also,
yeah.
Sure.
I started to think about this a little more metatextually, and maybe this is like a thought that I haven't fully processed yet. But it's almost like, is this Kane's like final thoughts as he's dying, trying to imagine how people are gonna carry on his legacy, and
Oh.
is this all like in his head, like people caring about him this much? I don't know. That's a thought I just had when watching that, considering that flaw. Like I don't know if it was intentional, but maybe is this like, this man trying to salvage what people think of him in his head? Like, are people gonna care this much about me when I'm dying? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well,
That
I
does
will.
kind of make sense because like the different characters they interview are almost like conflicting viewpoints. Like the best friend,
Oh yeah.
like is very cynical about him, but then he talks to another employer that's very supportive and always talk about like how great of a leader he was and how ambitious he was, and then of course he gets to the lover. That's kind of like the best of both worlds. Like she doesn't really know what to think of him. Like she has a very mixed viewpoint. And yeah, that's kind of
Well, and
an interesting angle of looking at it.
bear in mind, this was also at least a good 9 years before Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon,
Yep.
which
True.
really kind of perfects in a lot of ways that idea of who actually is this person. What is there a reliable you know
Narrator. Yeah.
narrator?
Yep.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I agree with you, Devin. I mean, I feel like we have spent a lot of time talking about the technicality and the craft of this film. I will say this: the plot to me, it feels a little basic in a lot of ways. Not to downplay it. I mean, I do think that there is something there. It does feel, I don't know, maybe a little bit straightforward, a little bit
Well,
simplistic,
But I
yeah,
feel
and I
like that's
think
the
that's a
point.
perspective
Yeah.
from our from how we look at these things, because
well,
I think
and
this film
see,
is so influential that this became the norm after a
sure, and
while.
see, this is the
At the
thing that
time,
no,
not
and
so
this is what
much.
I was just gonna say. It's like looking back on it, like, yeah, I kind of have this colored interpretation of like it's a little simplistic or a little straightforward. But then in the back of my mind, I think, you know, without this film, I don't know if there's a Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
I
Boom.
don't I
Exactly.
don't know, like, this film, the story of this film, this question of, for what is it for a man to, gain the whole world at the cost of his soul? I mean, it had never been done like this before, and I think it is so much of a landmark that it's like you can see this now, kind of, in retrospect, like in
Mhm.
so many films that I love that have come out since.
Oh yeah, like There Will Be Blood, and right, you're comparing a film that came out more than 60 years later.
Oh,
Exactly.
Um,
absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
here's the
and
thing.
that's
Yeah,
just a
and that's
that's
how
a
huge it is.
testament.
Like, I
That,
can't name or think of any other film significant that came out from 1941 off the top of my head.
well, but that's a testament to how timeless this film is.
absolutely.
Citizen Kane is so good that we're comparing it to a film that came out, what, 10 years ago? I mean,
Yeah.
when did There Will Be Blood come out? Did
2007.
2008? Yeah, so we're talking about the difference between 60 years versus less than 15 or so, you
Yeah.
know.
And
And
here's the thing, like I feel like the plot of Citizen Kane, much like There Will Be Blood, is deliberately simple to give us like a complex character study. Like what's the plot of There Will Be Blood? Like this crazy guy comes into a new place and starts up an oil company. Okay, like that's pretty straightforward, but it's the character work and learning more about this complicated person that drives like the fascination and drives like your interest. Like a film like that really hasn't been done before this, and I feel like I can never really get mad at the narrative being bland and the interview being a block of wood and just essentially there to give exposition because Citizen Kane is such a fascinating character. Like it doesn't matter. The plot doesn't matter. Citizen Kane matters, and the film never loses
And
focus of that.
I don't know if this film was really immediately successful. Like, correct me if I'm wrong.
It's
I don't think
not.
it was like critically panned, but I think not a lot of people saw it. Like, I was just looking up what were the like top grossing films of that year, 1941. It doesn't even break the top 10. Like, there are movies like Sergeant York, Hockey Tonk, Louisiana Purchase. I've never heard of any of those, but those were the movies that were popular at the time.
Well,
It probably took a while before this film really started to pick up momentum and people really started appreciating it.
yeah, and I heard like it was like critically panned and it didn't make all that much money in theaters. It was nominated for Oscars, but it only won one. And when it did win that single Oscar, he got booed big time. Like he couldn't even properly give out a speech because people were booing him so hard. Like people were just not digging the
wow.
movie back then at all. And it really did take time to find its footing and just kind of get a
Oh
hold
yeah.
again.
I mean, we talk about like a movie like Blade Runner with great praise today, but that film was not successful when it first came
Not
out.
at all.
Especially the version that was released at the time with the voiceover, you know.
Yeah. That
Like
version.
it was and you can contrast and compare like Siskel and Ebert's review from when it came out to when they were talking about it 10 years later, and they've completely changed their tune in that 10-year gap.
Absolutely.
Especially I guess they re-released the director's cut of it. It takes people, it takes culture a while to kind of catch on to some of these things. So it makes me wonder what films are coming out now that are kind of being shanghaied or like just being looked over that might be more
Well,
significant down the
That's
line.
what I was
it
gonna
was
ask. I actually written up questions for this episode, and first question I was gonna ask, tying into Citizen Kane, is: do you feel like there's a film released within the past 5 years that's currently being lambasted by critics and audiences, but is going to get a Citizen Kane like following in the future, deservedly or not?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and I think one film that's going to be that way is Suspiria. Like, of course, it's like a very different movie, and I'm not saying it's as good as Citizen Kane. I personally like it more, but it's not on
You're
like the
talking
same
about
level.
the 2018
The
remake of
2018
Suspiria,
remake
not
of
the
Suspiria. I feel
yeah.
like that's going to get a John Carpenter's The Thing style follow up in the future, because even though like critics were mixed on it when it came out and it barely made any money, if you look at Letterboxd, like it's pretty positive, and a lot of YouTube reviews are pretty positive about it, except for Defocus Lens. Like I think it is going to get that kind of cult classic follow up, and sometimes it does
Yeah.
just take a while for people to gel their head around a film, especially if it's a very different take and
Mhm.
approach to a
I
familiar
mean,
subject matter.
This film is no Citizen Kane, but while we're on the topic of horror, one that is gaining a lot of notoriety now, actually surprisingly, is Skinamarink. Um, and
Ooh.
a lot of people in the horror community have really gravitated toward that. And it's the type of film I never would have expected to become popular, but is kind of one that I've wanted to see get made for a while. One that's very kind of lo-fi and there's a lot of negative space and it has these I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it's the type of film that I've been wanting to see for a while and I never thought would gain any kind of notoriety or interest. So it I don't know, it gives me some encouragement that there might be some ideas that I've been having on the back burner that might have a chance.
I still need to watch that one for sure. What about you, Steven?
I have a couple of answers for this. I will absolutely echo your sentiment about Luca Guadagnino's Suspira remake. I think that is definitely one that I will that I think we'll see a real reappraisal for. There was a film that came out within it was actually 2021, and it currently has only a 3.3 on Letterboxd. But I think there is something absolutely profound in that film, and that is Paul Schrader's The Card Counter.
Oh.
I think that's a film that people didn't get. I don't know why. I don't know how. I think that a lot of people are very quick to write it off because it's very uh, I think there's an mind you incorrect reading, but I think there's a reading of it or a consensus of it that it's almost like a greatest hits reel for Schrader, that he's kind of going through the motions. I disagree. I think that film is absolutely brilliant, and I think honestly, I would say that it's better than First Reformed.
Okay, but
Ooh.
how does it compare to Dog Eat Dog?
Well, I mean, that's not for a
Oh man.
competition.
I mean,
Um,
no,
I would love to see some critical reappraisal for S. Craig Zahler. I think a lot of his stuff is very mixed because it's a little long, it's a little art house. People are kind of uh, missing the forest for the trees with regards to these ideas about his politics or whether he endorses his character's actions. For the record, I don't think he does. I don't think that's the point of what he's doing. But I think in time, people will discover him and kind of understand better what I think he's trying to do. And I think he's doing brilliantly.
right on.
Um,
And I think it just takes people like you to really, see that and give those films a chance. And for Paul Schrader, it'll either be you giving him praise or Paul himself. Um, but no,
yeah,
I still have to see Card Counter. I do want to check it out. Um, I'm still dumbfounded from Dog Eat Dog, but that's another discussion. Um,
yeah.
anyway,
Um,
we circumvented all the way from Citizen Kane to talk about completely different movies, but it's just so hard to
yes.
even approach this kind of film just because it has such a notoriety. I do remember very distinctly it was like one of the first films we watched for film class, and I remember really unironically getting into the film like, wow, this was a lot better than I expected it to be, and I really felt a weird personal connection to it that's making me think about my own life and maybe I should get rid of some things that I don't need or they might consume me. And then I remember getting excited to talk with people about it the next day, and there's this one girl I was sitting next to who's really cute. She's like, it was so boring, and I'm like, oh, I have nothing to say to that.
Leave her ass. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
No, no,
No, no,
she ain't the one. Keep
Yes,
moving,
no.
this
team.
ain't it.
Know your
Yeah.
worth.
But I feel like people that use the term boring as a dismissive or as an initial criticism is usually more of an indication that they miss the point rather than a comment on the film itself, which is something I'm gonna bring up later. We'll get to that. Um, anyway,
Uh-oh.
um, just
um,
I'm not bearing the lead on that one yet, but um,
okay.
I
Um,
don't know what else to add to this film. I do think that there was I mean, I was trying to watch it with some fresh eyes today, but I don't know. Life has been hard for me to kind of get back into these things the way I used to.
Understood. And I mean, I do think there's something valid to where it's like, kind of like I was talking about earlier. It's like, this is a film that is so intimidating just to even approach. And I think that is a testament to just how important it is, how really beautiful it is in the history of cinema. And while it may not have lived up to all of its sort of lofty expectations, I can't say that I was disappointed by it or that I'm mad that I saw it. I'm actually, really ecstatic that we have the opportunity today to talk about a film like this. Yeah.
And I'm just like, well, mildly jealous. It's so weird when I go back and watch some of these older films and the characters depicted in it are like 25 or in their late 20s, and I'm that age now, and they look much older to me still. They look like they're in their 40s to me. Like,
Well, it's almost like the Netflix teenager phenomenon.
oh God. I mean
Yeah.
that's been a thing in like rom-coms and horror films forever, is that they'll have these like 20 and 30-year-olds playing teenagers. So
Oh,
I don't know.
somebody sent me the pilot script to Euphoria,
Really?
and there's the introduction of the character Jules, and that character is introduced as a young, fresh-faced 17-year-old, and Hunter Schafer, the actress who plays that character, she's just over like 25 years old. So it is always kind of funny to
Yeah.
to see
I'm
those
fresh out of college. No, you're not.
How do you
But
do,
no,
fellow kids?
I get it though. Like I get why that's still a practice, because it's hard to direct. Like some teenagers really have to be like talented and really assure themselves in order to perform those kind of roles. And it helps if
Yes.
you're a little older and your mind's a little more set. You're able to reflect those things a little bit. I get it, but it is always a weird thing. And when I watch, and I think Orson Welles actually was like 25, 26 when he made this, which doesn't make me feel inadequate at all, um, in terms of what I've accomplished. But I don't know. Maybe I have better things. I will say though. So a lot of people have called Orson Welles genius and overpraise it, and I do think that that's dangerous territory to go into. I think it kind of puts him on a pedestal, perhaps, um, which it's always hard to come down from. Or when you are put on a pedestal, you kind of come down crashing harder. But I do think what you can take away from this is that him just being confident enough in himself to trust what he has in mind to do, and just does what he can to make it happen. I think that's something we can all learn a little bit from, and just believing in yourself a little bit more, I think, shows just what you can accomplish with that. And yeah, and I think that this is a great film as an example of that type of ethos. So I like it.
What'd you guys rate
Well,
it?
oh, good question. I was just about to ask that. I'm gonna give this a solid 9 out of 10.
I'm gonna give it a
Nice.
9.6.
Ooh. I'm
Very
giving this
nice.
one a grade out of 10. Closer to a 7.5 than 8.5. Yeah, I don't really have anything wrong with
Really,
it. I don't think there's
really.
any like issues I can immediately point out, but it's just like
Well,
something's missing. I don't know what it
so
is, but something's
so
missing that's avoiding
so
like a
so
full-on
no.
connection
Now
for me.
now that you've said this, I have to bring this up because Devin was talking about some of our inside jokes on the server and on the podcast.
Oh.
So there was an interview between Nicholas Winding Refn, director of Drive,
I know where this is going.
and William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist. And the interview was in conversation about Friedkin's film Sorcerer. Now, for some context, Friedkin interviewed Fritz Lang, and he was kind of the young, cocky new kid on the block. And so Refn in the interview over the course of it is constantly saying these things to get a reaction out of Friedkin, and really poke at him, and so he makes the statement to William Friedkin. He's like, "Well, I think my film Only God Forgives is a masterpiece. To which Friedkin says, "Oh my God, if that's a masterpiece, what is Citizen Kane?" And Refn just goes, "Well, it's great. I mean, it's okay."
His head's so far up his ass.
This has been a running joke. We turned it into a little emoji on our Discord server of Friedkin's face after Refn unironically called
That's the context.
Citizen Kane great. And here you are.
Yep. I mean, it's great.
Oh
like,
God.
it's like I said. Like, I don't think it quite lives up to the hype, but it's really well done.
The Friedkin face right now.
I love it.
It's really good. Like, Adolf tends to really good.
And reference saying like I made the reference
Okay.
like I made the film under budget and all this, and he's like, who gives a shit? I love it.
It's not a blip. It's not a pimple on the asshole of humanity. What drive?
Imagine being the interviewer for that interview, just being like, "Oh,"
I couldn't contain my laughter. That would be so.
Oh yeah, I would be like laughing my ass off. I don't care. Producer would be like, "Stop laughing." I'm like, "No, I'm gonna keep laughing." Speaking of,
yes,
crime films that people think are masterpieces, Vertigo.
Yes, Vertigo.
Woo.
It's a 1958 American film noir psychological thriller. It is directed, produced by Alfred Hitchcock. It is based on a 1954 French novel. It stars Jimmy Stewart as a former police detective, John Scotty Ferguson. He retired because of an incident in the line of duty that cost his partner his life. He developed a severe, extreme fear of heights, a sense of vertigo, this fear and false sense of rotational movement. He lives a very quiet life with a woman who loves him, who's one of the most interesting jobs I've seen in any narrative film. She designs underwear, which is kind of interesting.
She's Victoria's Secret.
Yeah, no, she's a girl boss. She was pre-Victoria's Secret. So they're romantically involved. Everything seems to be doing well. Suddenly, an old friend, a ghost of this Jimmy Stewart's character's past, kind of enters in. His name is Gavin, and he hires Scotty to be a private investigator to follow his wife. His wife has been acting strangely. The idea is perhaps, his wife has been possessed by the ghost of a strange, violent woman from centuries past. So again, I want to stress this is the first time I've seen any of the films that we'll be discussing tonight. This to me was my absolute favorite. I think this film is fucking brilliant. Yeah. I think this film is a masterpiece. And see, this is the thing. We're going to talk about this later because the Sight and Sound poll updates. It's reevaluated. They update it. They poll critics and directors and filmmakers every 10 years. And so the addition of Jeanne Dielman, which we'll discuss, was this year's big shock. But prior to that, the last poll, Vertigo took the number one spot in 2012. And it was seen as such a bizarre change. It was so unexpected, so out of left field. The idea that had dethroned Citizen Kane as the greatest movie of all time. I'm here to say I think it is better than Citizen Kane. I mean, I will argue that, the idea of a list like this is really subjective, and that at some point there's there's something inherently masturbatory about trying to say this is objectively the greatest films ever made. And so at some point, I mean, really, taste is subjective. Film is subjective, as is any medium or art. Um, but for me personally, I think this is far and away the best film we're going to be discussing tonight. And I'm extremely interested to hear you guys' thoughts.
This is
Here's
my first
yeah,
time seeing this film as well, and I thought that I had it, like amongst my Alfred Hitchcock collection, and I was surprised to find that I didn't. I had a bunch of other like minor films of his. Rear Window was the other Jimmy Stewart film of his that I had seen, and this one just somehow happened to miss me, even though I had a poster of it at one point, which is if nothing else makes you feel like a disingenuous film lover, it's having posters for films I haven't seen. That said, having finally seen this film, I absolutely understand the hype of it. It so I know what to expect from Alfred Hitchcock. Generally speaking, it's going to be a well crafted thriller, although albeit dated for its time probably. But generally speaking, it's going to be like a good time. Um, what I didn't expect were it to have such like a for it to hit on the emotional level that it did. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if there was any other mainstream film that really tackled the subject of like suicidal ideation before this.
yeah. Was it really a film to tackle like the condition of vertigo and dealing with past trauma before this
Well, that
movie,
as
and like a
well,
major
and
Hollywood picture with a star like Jimmy Stewart?
I mean, Psycho kind of tackled some issues of
Yeah,
that
but that was after.
it was after, but I think this film um I don't know. I'm still processing my thoughts on it. I literally just watched it, but um, I didn't expect it to tackle like that subject, especially for the time period. And it makes me wonder how it was taken at the time, or if there were any other films that really tackled the topic of suicide, like
Well,
prior to this.
it was not well received at the time at all. People did
Mm.
not get this film.
Like all good
Um,
movies.
yeah,
Let's be honest.
exactly.
Do you think they were
Well, it did.
offended by the topic? It also there was another thought that I had, and that was like the way that they talked about or handled like trauma at the time was not great. Like, oh, he's suffering from acute melancholia after literally seeing a woman, or at least as far as he saw at the time, a woman leap to her death. Like, no shit.
Yeah, I know.
He's mildly upset by seeing a woman die. Uh,
Well, it's also surprisingly tasteful, like in its
True.
depiction as well. Like it's very understanding, and we definitely it does a great job of like getting us to empathize with the character and what he's going through.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I really like that. Even though that sequence always looks kind of dated to me, with the colors flashing, and you can clearly tell that he's got like a green screen bodysuit on, like above the neck, or like some suit that teases out the colors. That's just his head. In the context of what it's showing, that kind of him being overwrought with guilt, and just these flashes of like emotion, in like a dream sequence. I think it's very effective.
Yeah, the
Um,
music I think really
like
sells that scene in
I,
particular.
I I'd always see that sequence cut right next to the Stargate sequence in 2001: Space Odyssey, and I'm
Yeah.
like, one of these is clearly technically superior to the other, but in the context of the story, I think it absolutely works.
Yeah, they both kind of have the same effect in a way for different
True.
reasons.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and we've talked about this too with Citizen Kane. The influence that this film has had, and there's another film on our podcast later tonight that I would argue that's one of my big criticisms is that it doesn't have a lot of influence, and I maybe struggle to understand the importance of it. Not to bury the lead, but Citizen Kane and Vertigo are films that today, this many years later, I have seen this film in so many different ways, and I love the ways that this film has been taken and reinterpreted and used in things that I love. I mean, this idea of duality, this sort of Jungian fascination of, two separate blonde women. I mean, this is this has Mulholland Drive written all over it. You know, this is, I mean, in the sense that it has inspired so many things that I love, and it is,
A little bit
you
of
know, it's
persona
always,
in there.
yeah, there's persona. I mean, there is, you know, God, I mean, if it wasn't for Hitchcock, I don't know that Brian De Palma would have a career,
No,
honestly.
I'm with you. Like, honestly, I don't
So
think Blowout would exist without like Hitchcock kind of
no, not
setting the tone
Blowout,
for good
not
thrillers.
no, I mean not Blowout or Dress to Kill or Body Double, any of those films. Here's the thing, I always think it's funny because I've done this before, and I couldn't think of an example. Well, sure. I mean, here's an example. You know, you look at the 1950s, The Thing from Another World. You watch that film and you say, well, it was okay. It was kind of
For the time,
cheesy.
I guess, yeah.
It's
But
cheesy and dated, and it's okay for its time. And then you watch John Carpenter's The Thing, and you go, oh my God, look at what he did with this, and look at what he turned it into. And that's usually, I guess, what I'm used to seeing. But here, it's like you look at what this has been turned into, and it's just as good, if not better. Like, it lives up to the expectations of other filmmakers that have used it for their own means.
hmm,
It's like, I honestly, I mean, I'm like speechless because of this film. And it's funny because when I saw, when I looked on Letterboxd, there was like one of the top reviews was talking about how brilliant of an essay that it reads for, you know, toxic masculinity, the male gaze, those kinds of things. And here's the thing, I think that's a valid reading of it, but I think that's only such a small part of it.
yeah,
There's things that I've gone back and rewatched even since the first time that I watched it within the last few days. And it's things that I picked up on that I didn't even catch the first time. And it's so much more than just that. It's like, forgive the the sort of pun, but it's like, it's almost like a kaleidoscope in and of itself. There's so much to pull from and so
true.
much to learn from with each viewing.
That brings me to my question. Because there is like a common criticism of this film, but also like a common defense of this film on the same topic. Where my question for you guys is, do you think this film is guilty of the male gaze? Or do you think this film is criticizing the male gaze? Or is it maybe doing a little bit of both?
I mean, I haven't thought about it from that particular lens, but I do think for the time it's actually a little bit critical of it, or at least it's a little more aware of it than other films had been prior. And I think it shows that kind of the pitfalls of that. Like he projects onto, I believe it's this other woman who reminds him of you know
Hmm.
of the woman that died, and that also leads her to fall to her death.
Yeah, they're the same woman,
Well,
but like there's even a
Yeah.
line that's very important she says where it's like, can't you just love me for me? And he refuses. Like, I need you to be the way I pictured you. Not only is that very meta for Hitchcock, who, let's be honest, kind of has a blonde
Right.
fetish in all of his movies, and he constantly hires actors that aren't blonde and turns them into blondes and this kind of image that he projects for himself. But it's also very critical of people like men having like very high expectations of women, I think, where you have
True,
to
and
be
and
like
and,
this,
and
you have to be this way.
they project a certain image, and that was actually a pretty heartbreaking scene. It's like, will you love me if I dress like this or whatnot? And
God,
it's like creating
yeah.
this false image just to be shown affection, and that's kind of a dangerous thing. Like I knew they were literally played by the same actress, and I mean I was thinking maybe that for the plots or in his head that they are exactly the same person, but maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe I'm just misreading that or overthinking about it, but no, I thought that that was really interesting, the way that that unfolded.
hmm Yeah, and like the whole idea that like maybe stalking someone with like a mental illness like isn't a good idea, and it is like something that inevitably backfires on him and kind of ends up ruining his
well,
life
I
when he
don't
already
I
had
don't
the
know.
perfect woman.
I don't. Well, that's what I was going to bring up. I don't know that this film is guilty of the male gaze. I mean, in some sense it is, but I think it's smarter than that. I think at the end of
Absolutely.
the day, I think this
Oh,
is
for
a
sure.
film, and one thing that I really thought was fascinating was the heartbreak of the scene where Jimmy Stewart's character is completely catatonic, and he's just witnessed this woman, what he believes, has committed suicide or fallen to her death, and he's just completely in this frozen catatonic state. And the character of I believe it's Midge, the woman that I
Midge,
spoke
yep.
about, yeah, the underwear designer. Um, she makes the statement that it's so tragic that he loves this woman, and that's what's sort of doomed him to this catatonic state, and yet she's always been right there, and
Yeah.
he still loves her, and really he doesn't love her. What he loves is the idea of her. He loves this image of her that he's made in his own mind, and it's tragic, and it's Freudian in a way, and it's I mean, it's a film that is just as hypnotic and beautiful as it is completely disgusting.
It's very disturbing. It's kind
And
of a
It is.
film like that
No,
gets
it
in your
is.
head.
I really felt bad for Midge's character when she like revealed that portrait that she made of like herself to him, and it was like her trying to connect with him one more time, and he kind of rejects her, and then she starts like tearing out herself afterwards. Like that was genuinely like sad to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Well,
like
this is.
even if it was like in poor taste, like she was like genuinely trying to help him out. Not only that, but she put a ton of work into helping him out. Like the amount of patience that must have went into that painting just for him to immediately dismiss it
Hmm.
Yeah,
is
no,
heartbreaking.
and
Yeah.
that's why I don't know if it's a film that is guilty of the male gaze as much as it is like a cautionary tale.
It very much
Uh,
so. Yeah. And
yeah.
also, yeah, we gotta talk about the plot twist. And probably my biggest issue with this film, I have like so many tiny nitpicks, but despite that, I think this film resonates with me way more than Citizen Kane. And you mentioned
Absolutely, I
this
agree.
when reviewing Psycho, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that the ending twist is kind of ruined by an over explanation of it. And I
Yeah.
kind of feel like it's the same case with Vertigo a little bit. Like, I already had the imagery of her going for the different costumes, going for the different wig, Jimmy Stewart getting the confession of her at the end. Why do I also need a letter that conveniently explains every part of the plot twist as well on top of
I
that?
think that's a product of just audience expectations at the time. It's the
I
same
know.
reason there's the big exposition dump in Psycho. Modern audiences wouldn't need that. They would get enough from just the reveal. Where
Well,
back
yeah, and
then,
I mean,
there
I will. Yeah, I'll just.
that was patting the audience on the back a little bit.
Absolutely. Like
Well,
that's why
and
I can't
I'll.
even blame like Hitchcock because this definitely felt like a similar situation where a producer watched the film and thought, "Yeah, we think our audiences are going to be too stupid." Just this because it feels very slapped on, like just
Yeah,
the added narration and the fact that she's writing a letter out of nowhere. Like why is she like writing a letter just to throw it out again? Like, it feels very tacked on.
well, so I'll say this to Hitchcock's credit. Um, kind of with regards to all of that, it's like I agree with Devin that it's a necessity, but it's also like I don't know. I mean, I feel like God. I mean, and this was something that Quentin Tarantino actually did a podcast, and he was talking about Hitchcock and how he felt about him. It's like Hitchcock was a director who was brilliant, but he was also very held back by the censors and the Hays Code and
Absolutely.
audience expectation, as well as like what is the word I'm looking for, studio interference, and
Mhm.
Yes, there are certain things in his films that have maybe not aged well. I can certainly attest to that. Like, I'm a massive fan of the old like Tennessee Williams adaptations. Those are films that are completely butchered by the Hays Code. Those are you look at the films and it's like they're absolutely well acted and well presented, but then you look at what Tennessee Williams had in the play, and it's like, oh, holy shit, that was
So much
totally
better.
cut and
Yeah.
neutered. Yeah. So I think I will say this, just in defense of Hitchcock. I mean, I think it's actually a testament to his genius that in spite of all of those constraints, he still made something that is this level of masterful.
And this dark, like the ending
And this
itself
dark
is like
so
just so
brutal.
like I
I
know
have
it,
to talk
yeah, go on.
about so everyone talked about the Vertigo shot, which is what started that whole like technique where the yeah, it's like
The
so
dolly
so
zoom.
Such a good
what yeah,
shot.
it's a dolly zoom. It's where the dolly moves back while the camera zooms in, or vice versa. I think it's vice versa in this case, where uh, the lens zooms out while the camera moves closer, and it creates that exaggerated effect. And that's been copied and used in just about every major film since, or when there's a moment of realization, very notably in Jaws. Everyone talks about like those shots, and understandably so. It's an innovative technique and that you see very ubiquitous in Hollywood. One shot that really took me by surprise that I thought was brilliantly staged was when he was kissing the girl toward the end, and
Yes.
he's having the obtrusive thought while kissing her in the apartment. The camera like spins around, and just from like lighting and staging, he's like back in that church for a moment as he's looking over his shoulder. It's like he's having an obtrusive thought while he's like having this moment with this woman because he's remembering what happened. And just little things like that really took me by surprise. 'Cause they're not talked about nearly as much, but I thought that was just some brilliant staging. It was probably all built on like a sound stage, and the camera just kind of orbits around them. But the way they lit it and the way they staged and acted it out is such a brilliant reveal, and I absolutely love
Well,
that
and
one
not
shot.
just
Absolutely.
not just that moment, the way that it's shot or the way that it's presented, but also the absolutely gorgeous score by Bernard Herrmann.
This
You know,
may be, I'm going to say something controversial. This may be a better score than Psycho.
I honestly think I agree.
This may be a better score than Taxi Driver,
I
in my
Well,
opinion.
I will say as far as well, yeah, the music is excellent in this, but also Saul Bass. I mean, he was an excellent like he's the person that made the titles for this film
Oh
and several
yeah.
other films. I love the use of the spirographs that they use,
Yeah.
even though it's just like he drew the spirograph and then he just kind of spin it around. But I really love that. It's very iconic in the poster design, and anytime I see like a hypnotic kind of spirograph, you think Vertigo.
Yeah. It's just become so iconic and so ingrained, and we have even talked about the incredible costume design uh designed by the person that inspired Edna Mode in The Incredibles. I need to look up her name real quick.
Oh,
I am not kidding. This is the woman that inspired that person. And apparently she's not much different, which is interesting. I'd very much like to see interviews based on her now. Where is it? Gotta look up the cast and crew. Sorry, bear with me for a second, guys.
So Edith Head.
Yes, that's her. Very
So
iconic costume designer, excellent costumes. Love the use of green and gray for uh like the love interest in particular. Just very effective stuff. Yeah, she kind of
well,
looks like
and
Edna Mode.
he does, yeah. No, it's also interesting, and I'm glad you brought this up about the use of green because there's so much color theory, surrounding the use of green in particular and the way that it's lit around Kim Novak.
It's the color of
This
desire.
idea, well, it is the color of desire, but it's the color of nature, and it's the
Oh,
color of they go into this very like dreamscape forest, and the use of green, and they're talking about how a tree never dies. And that is, in essence, Kim Novik's character. She doesn't die, she's just simply reborn. And, Jimmy Stewart is trying to rebuild her in such a way that she's more like the version of her that he would want her to be. But,
Mhm.
she's the same. She's the one. He's trying to change her for his own selfish, reasons.
Mhm.
In a way, I mean, he's kind of, it's kind of like an incel, But
Oh yeah.
He's
but
He's
literally me.
no, no, I just remembered a joke that I was gonna make about Citizen Kane when he stands up and claps for the woman. It's like simp.
yeah. But no, I mean,
SIMP card. Yeah.
but no, I mean, it's the green, never changing, never dying force of nature. And the use of red, the use of red in that office of the Gavin character
And the
who starts
restaurant.
this
Yeah.
whole mess. Yeah, it's just the color theory alone in this film is fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If this had a terrible script, which it doesn't, it happens to have a brilliant script that is exploring all of these deep, complex themes that is so far ahead of its time. But even
Mhm.
if it had a shitty script, just the way that this film is lit and the way that it's presented and the way that color is used, this film is a masterpiece. I mean,
Oh yeah.
on a visual level, this film is a masterpiece.
I also think that, well, the writing called for that type of visual presentation. Like
Hmm.
working with someone like Hitchcock, he's like, there's some great ideas in this, and I have to present this visually for cinema. So I think it inspires that brilliant visual presentation. And I could nitpick compositing errors, like some of the effects of her falling don't hold up well. Um, by today's standards, but that's really nitpicky and it's just a product of its time. It's still very effective in the context of the story of what's happening. Like when
Well,
you see
and
them out of context, they're easy to point out those technical flaws, but in context, you're just immersed in what's happening.
Well, and it's also, I mean, you're talking about that the story kind of calls for it, but it also is so well earned. It
Hmm.
never feels out of place.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's just incredibly well detailed all around. Like Alfred Hitchcock was always a perfectionist, and I think that shows the most in this movie. And while I have major problems of how the plot twist is revealed, I do love the build up and the clues you get to the plot twist. Like how the guy at the beginning of the movie perks up his head as soon as Jimmy mentions that he isn't married, or the fact that they constantly compare the girl to the painting as if to say like, oh, she was just made out of scratch, and they're just as fake and as, yeah, it's just so much attention to detail. Like, I'm speechless. And despite the fact that, yeah, like the pacing is really sluggish towards the end, in my opinion, and I have tons of other small issues, and how Vertigo's basically like used as a plot device and not much more than that. I don't know. It's a flawed masterpiece to me. Like, it has so many issues, but I can't help but loving it
Uh,
and resonating with it at the end of the day.
I do think Vertigo works as a metaphor for the plot, though, like the way he kind of spirals. And actually, the plot, weirdly enough, reminded me of this Deftones song, "Be Quiet and Drive Far Away," where it's like
Huh.
this. Well, in that song, it's almost like this guy kidnaps a girl and has her dress up in his last girlfriend's clothes or something like that. Um, remind me of that a little bit.
Well, I mean,
Constance.
there's also 1993. There was a film called California. Have any of you guys
Mm.
seen that?
Not yet.
It's California with a K, and it's David Duchovny, Michelle Forbes, Brad Pitt, Juliette Lewis, and I mean, basically, Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis are these serial killing, Bonnie and Clyde types, and there's a whole sequence where David Duchovny and his girlfriend, who are I think they're journalists. God, it's been forever since I've seen this, but there's a moment where they discover that they're in over their heads and that something's amiss because Brad Pitt actually cuts Juliette Lewis's hair to look more like David Duchovny's girlfriend, and it's like this big reveal. And it's like, ooh, there's a weird obsession here, And so, I mean, it again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying. It's like the effects of this film, the ripple of just how many things we've seen that were directly inspired by this, and what a testament that is. And man, honestly, I can't think of enough good things to say. This film is brilliant. Like, and yes, I mean, I agree with you, Ian. It does have its flaws, it does have its faults, but ultimately, I think that just adds to its charm. I think that adds to its genius.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It really took me by surprise. Like, I was more into this film than I expected it to be, and yeah,
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's easily become my favorite Hitchcock film.
What would you guys rate it?
I'm gonna give it a 9.
9. What about you,
I'm gonna
Steven?
give it a 10 out of 10.
Ooh, damn. I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. Closer to a 9 than an 8. I have so many like tiny issues with it, but man, like
You
it's just
could
connects with me
bump
at the
that
end of
up
the day.
to a 9.
It's close, but not quite. There's every time it gets to like the third act, I'm just like, I feel like it lost some of its magic for me. Until I get to the end, I'm like, oh, okay, I love it again. Never mind, we're good.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's fair.
Yeah. But next up, last but not least, the number one film on AFI's Sights and Sound list. Jeanne Dielman, and I will not butcher the pronunciation of the subtitle again. This is a 1975 French film, directed by Chantal Akerman. Very experimental in its approach, very experimental in its pacing and its themes and its characters. Essentially, we see 3 days through the eyes of Jeanne Dielman, who was previously a housewife to a husband that's been dead for several months and is now kind of stuck in a lifestyle where she's in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, going to the store to buy more yarn, cooking for her son who's a bit of a picky eater and reads too much and leaves on the lights when he shouldn't. And the way the film is structured is that it's purposely very monotonous and very much you're kind of forced to watch her go through this mundane life along with her for long periods of time. And like it's kind of got mixed results over the years, but recently it's kind of blown up and letterboxed, and of course the Sights and Sounds for the number one spot. And it's also kind of perked up a little bit in terms of like the feminist community and what this film has to say about living as a housewife or living as kind of as a woman in general, especially back in the 70s. So I am very curious to hear what you guys think.
Well, I'm just going to open the floor here a little bit because I had never heard of this film. I thought that I had heard of it, and then I watched it, and what I realized was what I had actually heard of was Chantal Akerman's previous film, which is similar. I think that was actually her debut, which was I, You, He, She, or Je tu elle. Yes. So now that's another film that I had not seen, but it had quite a reputation. I had never heard of this film prior to Sight and Sound. I had only heard of this other film, and so I went into this with as open a mind as possible, with expectations quite literally on the floor. I was actually, I was one of the people who kind of pushed for this episode on the podcast because I think it's important to discuss what is the critically, what are the most important films of all time. according to critics or audiences or what have you. I really wanted to touch on that. It's topical. It's in vogue. you know, um, and I remember our friend Daryl Ailes suggested this episode. I love the idea. Ian, you had a very strong reaction to doing this episode in the first place because of this film. Not to bury the lead, but you were like, "Oh my god, don't make me watch this again."
Yeah. So side note, I have watched this before.
Right. And I get the impression that you did not like it. Now, we talked about this briefly with Vertigo. 2020 or 2012, excuse me, almost 10 years ago now. Vertigo took the #1 spot, and it was extremely controversial. This is the Sight and Sound current poll, and again, the reactions were very strong. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian said, it's high time that a woman won the all-time vote. This is like a step forward for feminism. Meanwhile, Armand White said that the film was a dull Marxist feminist token.
Marxist.
It's always
French. It's French.
Oui, baguette.
Yeah.
It's like anytime something rubs them the wrong way, they'll lump it in with other things they don't like.
Marxism. Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, I love Armand White for what a mad lad he is. I don't agree with his politics, but holy shit, he makes me laugh. I mean that in the best possible way, but I just love how against the grain he is. He reminds me of like a modern day Pauline Kael. So Armand White hated this film, was very upset about the choice. Paul Schrader went viral and said that it undermines the poll's credibility, that it's woke rejiggering of the polls, and it's distorted woke reappraisal. This was a very polarizing decision. Let's just leave it at that. And in spite of all that, I wanted to go into this film and I wanted to love it. And in fact, I wanted to love it even more because as funny as this is, Ian, I know you did not care for it. So I wanted to come out here and be like, no, actually,
well, actually, yeah.
it's a masterpiece, just to hear your reaction. And I think I owe you an apology. I think this film is terrible.
I'm sorry. Can you say that slower and into my phone, please?
No. I mean, I really wanted to go into this film. My expectations were on the floor. I wanted to love this film with every fiber of my being. I don't get it. Now, I want to start out by saying I consider myself to be politically progressive where it counts. Please don't get me in your mentions that I'm saying this out of some right-wing reactionary patriarchal, like whatever buzzword you want to throw. That's not where I'm coming from. I think this is a film that confuses mundanity for narrative depth. I think it is insisting upon its cleverness by drawing everything out. It's such a landmark film in the quote unquote slow cinema movement, which I even take issue with that because I feel like Bela Tarr and Andrei Tarkovsky were doing this kind of thing prior, so I don't know how true that is. But I think it's like, look at this, look at how mundane it is, look at the banality of it all.
It's so unsettling. Yeah.
I don't think it ever wrestles with its own themes or ideas. I think this film is a massive missed opportunity. I just frankly do not get this.
Okay,
And
so
Ooh.
this is what else.
He's stepping into the ring.
Well, well, Not that I'm putting myself up here as a simp or anything.
Okay. You're
Steven,
the
I want,
fucking white knight
You know who
for
has to
the
say I'm not a simp or
art house
anything,
film.
simps?
Oh my
okay, no.
god.
Steven, I admire the fact that you had about 4 or 5 paragraphs of disclaimer preamble on your review on Letterboxd saying, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not fucking your sister's neighbor's cat, but I didn't like the movie that everyone else likes.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yes.
and I
Literally.
like and I like that that very much mirrored in your expression. I do think, and I also admire the fact that you avoided using the word boring, because that would have been the first thing I attacked. If this is, if
I know you. Yes, I'm familiar.
good, I'm glad I'm having an influence because I feel like people who use that word as a dismissive criticism that the film was boring, it's more reflection on themselves and on the film. And I also think a lot of people misunderstand the intent of the film. The film wasn't intending to provoke or was trying to be clever, really. Like I saw the interview with Chantal Ackerman that you posted. I don't know if you watched it, but I did. And she was stating how she grew up around routine and that this was something that was established early on in her life. And when some things happened, when some tragedies happened in their life, that kind of fell apart. And she was trying to capture this feeling onto film of how people really construct their lives around routine and how little disruptions can kind of throw people off. And this is what she was trying to put onto film. And I do think that people who were going into this um, expecting escapism, because that's what most films are. Admit, like every people generally go to theaters, go to cinemas for escapism. They want to get out of the mundanity of life, and this film throws you right back into it. And I think that's the point. And this is why it rubbed
No,
people the
no,
wrong way. And this is the thing. And that was the initial reaction. A lot of people uh, it is almost like torture for people to be subjugated to mundanity, especially in a movie theater. And it's almost like, and they were calling her a provocateur when that was not her intent at all. And it was just so funny. It's like she was just asking why people were rubbed the wrong way, and they were like projecting these things onto her. So I think films like this tend to reveal more about the audience than the film itself, which I find really
well,
fascinating.
here, okay, but see, I take issue with that because here's the
You know,
thing. Well, no, I do because here's the thing. I think it's very easy to dismiss the criticism of this film to say, ah, well, you go in and you're expecting spectacle, you're expecting escapism. I don't know that that's true. I mean,
well, I just mean generally audiences when they
no,
watch a film, they
I
expect escape.
understand, but I'm saying, I mean, to give myself a little more credit here, uh, you know, there are plenty of films that I love, that are very slow, very methodical, very mundane. Uh, I'm a massive fan of David Lynch. Now, a lot of his stuff is very surrealistic, but
Yeah, I
it
wouldn't
is
say
very
that's
drawn.
mundane.
But it's drawn
Anything
out.
but.
It's deliberate.
It's drawn
It is
out, it's deliberately paced, but it's very surreal. It's anything but mundane.
sure, but I
I would
mean,
say
what
with
is
David Lynch.
okay? So to be more accurate, what about Broken Flowers? That is a film that is incredibly, excruciatingly mundane. It is a film about Bill Murray is a guy who's sitting around his house and he receives a letter from a former girlfriend that he has a 19-year-old son that he's never met, and the entirety of the movie for 2 hours or whatever runtime it is, it's literally just Bill Murray visiting these old girlfriends, these ghosts of his relationships past. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Now, that is not a film that is operating in terms of spectacle or escapism. It's a very mundane look at the life of someone who is very sad and lonely and is trying to recapture something, this void that he's been filling with women and booze and all of this other
It's
stuff.
also a perspective you relate with more.
Well, I don't know. Well, okay, wait a minute. How do I relate to some middle-aged womanizer? Come on.
Well,
Well,
no, it's the fact that he's a man, I think, is what Devin's implying.
Well, but
That it's
but sure. Here's the thing, and I brought this up in my Letterboxd review. Um, have any of you guys seen the film Vivra sa vie?
not
I
yet.
have not.
It's on my list.
Okay, so this was a Jean-Luc Godard film. It is
Yeah.
one of his. Yes, I know. Um, and I know, you say Godard, and people go, first year film student, whatever.
I'm sorry.
But no, that is a film that is incredibly mundane, and it is about a young woman in Paris. She works at a record store. She's forced into prostitution. It's a day in the life of, this young prostitute who's trying to become something bigger, become something more, and it's told in 12 acts, and it's incredibly mundane. I think that's a brilliant film. I've talked about that film at length. I think it's amazing. This film, it it's I get that the point of it is soul crushing tedium. I get that it is supposed to be torturous. I get what it's going for. But the problem is it has nothing more to say than the surface level. Look at this woman. This is her life. I mean, there's nothing more. There's
Yeah,
nothing complex about this.
that's my biggest problem with the movie is that there's just no meat. Like I know the film is insisting me to care by showing the mundanity of her routine, but we never get a reason as to why we should care about her in the first place or what this routine means to her in any way.
What reason do you need?
Well, I need actual character development. I need a story. I need some kind of like emotional reason to care about this character. She mentioned that she was with her husband. Okay, what was that like? What did that
Well,
relationship mean to her? How did that
What?
affect her for better or for
I,
worse? Or
I will.
just
Okay,
give me
so
something.
I will say what this film did for me. And okay, I'm going to admit this, and this is something I don't like to admit, but I'm just going to be more honest with myself. I had a pretty divided attention watching this film, and actually, frankly, with the other two films as well. And I think this is just a product of, social media and other things, just other things going on in my life. I normally, when I try to get into these films, I like to give it my full undivided attention. I like to have nothing else going on. Unfortunately, that just wasn't the case here. So there was a lot of stuff I probably didn't pick up on because I had two screens on and I was trying to do other things at the same time while, you know, watching this film. So admittedly, my brain was kind of all over the place. But what I did see in it, um, was, yeah, just it's a very slice of life, very real time played out kind of, you know, just reality of this woman's life, and it's not being dramatized in any way. It's not glamorous. It's not trying to be showy or overly dramatic. It's just being, very straightforward. And when I was in the film, I wasn't feeling too much about it. Like I did think it was kind of interesting how transactional and unemotional some of the exchanges between her and her son were. They were being just kind of very matter of fact about certain things. Like she's reading this letter from their relatives in Canada, which is a fun connection there. And it's just being very straightforward. It's very unemotive. Um, and you would expect there to be some kind of emotional connection there, perhaps, and there is, but it's more restrained. It was after the film that I'd seen it that I started to notice my own mundane tasks that I do in my life, and I started to pay attention to them more. Like, there's these things that I do day to day that I'm very not conscious of. I think about other stuff when I'm doing these things, and it just made me more aware of my own just day to day life.
So,
And maybe
so
this is
I
something I shouldn't ignore. And I don't know. And it made me think about my relationship with my own mom. And maybe is there certain things
what-
that she goes through that I don't
here's
notice? So
oh,
that's the
oh,
effect
and I
that
think
I've had. It made me
no,
reflect on
and
my own life more.
I watched this movie with
I
my mother, and after 2 hours, she was like, "I can't take this anymore. I don't want to watch this."
so no, wait a minute. And I think what you're saying is valid, Devin. I really want to give you credit here, but
Thank you.
here's my
But
here's my question.
These nuts.
Here's
No.
my question. Here's my question. Okay, I understand. Okay, what you're saying. The point is the banality. The point is the mundanity. The point is
I think
that
the
it is
point is
not.
that it makes you
Well,
reflect
hold
on
on,
those elements. Go ahead.
wait. Okay, so the point is that it is subverting the idea and the expectation of spectacle and escapism. Okay, done. We understand that. We get it. Does a film that is simply subverting expectation and coming in and throwing away all these rules and conventions, does that automatically make it a good film?
No.
It doesn't. And
Well,
that also
I'm
wasn't her
asking Devin
intent,
here.
I think, entirely. Like,
Her intent
she,
was to make a documentary, and they wouldn't let her make a documentary, so she settled with this.
Well, but this is my question, because when people talk about this film, they talk about the idea that it is the antithesis to escapism, that it throws out these conventions, that it throws out these rules of cinema, that it is the sort of, this revolutionary idea to do something that we think of, uh, that we don't think of when we think of what a film can be. My question is, does that necessarily mean anything? If I film, paint drying, I mean, I'm being, somewhat facetious here, but it's like if I film a wall and there's paint drying because nobody's ever done that before, nobody's ever thought to do that before, or because it's so, in direct opposition to the idea of escapism in cinema, does that make that a masterpiece? I don't think that it does. And I think
well,
that's what this film has to offer. And I
Well,
think
my
that's
problem is that
all it
there's
has
this,
just
to
no
offer.
heart to it. Like, it feels very cynical
no,
and
no.
mean spirited.
I don't agree that it's heartless at all.
Uh,
What I do think that films like this do is it shows what you see in it more than what it's not about what the film is showing you, it's about what you see in it.
I don't know. To be honest, like,
And
this is gone.
it's films like this that I feel reveal more about the audience than the filmmaker. And
Yeah.
I say, and I have the same similar kind of thoughts with films like Quai or Baraka. I mean, there are obviously things that those films are maybe trying to say, but also the audience reaction says a lot more about. You get the point I'm going for? Like, I think,
Yeah, I
I mean,
get what you're trying.
people would rather, you know, people would rather walk out than be subjected to being bored when they're trying to escape their day-to-day life and
but
seeing a
I
film like
think,
this, which is
and
so interesting to me.
that's fine. I mean, and I get it. And I'm not saying, I talked about this in my review on Letterboxd as well. It's like there are so many female filmmakers, Lynn Ramsey, Agnes Varda, people who have done
Oh yeah,
similar
like
ideas.
I've looked at that Sight and Sound list, and I see Persona, and I see what was that other one? Meshes of the Afternoon. Those are some great feminist films that I absolutely love and would probably favor over watching this again. But
Well, and
I do think that I do think it inspires some interesting dialogue because people seem to have very strong reactions to it one way or the other, and that is what's interesting about the film. And
well, and
I kind of made a meme about this is that it's weird how people don't want to watch a film like this, yet they'll tune into Twitch streams of people cooking food or doing other mundane tasks
They at least cook it
for pa-
convincingly.
for, for
I
passive
mean, I
entertainment. And
see. I don't.
it's like a cultural shift in how people watch and consume things. Well, I for Twitch it's different. It's like you're creating a personal connection. There's a sense of interaction,
Yeah.
and it is a real thing happening. Although they are putting it on for show still. But it's funny how like because of how this film is framed and how it was presented, it wasn't taken well. But if this was literally just this woman and she wanted to live stream herself doing or doing her day-to-day life and there was some way of interacting with her, people might actually have more interest, which I just think, it's like that idea of meeting them is the message.
I don't know. Again,
I'm gonna.
I mean, Devin, I love you. I think you're giving this film entirely too much credit.
Well, a lot of
I
people are. Like, it's not
Here,
just
I
Devin, in
here's my
fairness.
thing.
Like,
I'm
tons of
talking
people.
about how people
Cinematography.
react to the film more than the film itself, bear in mind.
Yeah,
No,
and
but I
also,
mean,
like, Devin's not the only one.
cinematography
Yeah.
the cinematography is beautiful. Beautiful.
Eh,
It's
Brutal.
beautiful. The lead actress is brilliant. It did, again, I don't think it really like brought about the idea of slow cinema. I think Bela Tarr and Andrei Tchaikovsky were doing it prior. Maybe it brought it to more mainstream attention. I mean, you see people like Gus Van Sant who cite this as an influence on Elephant. So maybe it did make it more
Or
mainstream, and it sort of.
Jerry, which is one we have to talk about at some point.
Sure, and it maybe it pioneered that, and I would love to say that at the end of this film, the ends justify the means. The problem is there's no meaning to this. This is the most surface level interpretation of this, and I don't say this as someone who's anti-feminist. I put this in my review. I think that this is a sad reality that a lot of women have to deal with, that
Hmm.
they do have these soul crushing tedious lives. They have to do degrading unfortunate acts
And
to
this
put
is
food on the table for their children, but
eh,
there's so much more, there's so many more interesting ways that you could portray that.
well,
I
and
agree.
here's the thing. The intent of the filmmaker was to highlight these things that are underappreciated, the things that women do in their day-to-day lives, and I think that's important. I'm glad that they've captured it on film, even if it's not the most enjoyable watch. Just the fact that the effort was made to capture that, what this slice of life was in this time period for this type of person. I do think it's important that that was captured on film so that people can appreciate it. And I would maintain that the meaning is that retained is what you make of it, and your empathy or lack thereof is also reflected in how you view the film.
Well, so this brings up another sort of interesting question, because we're talking about empathy for this character. Um, we don't know very much about this
You don't
character. That's a
hardly know
very
anything about her.
How
well,
much do you
and
need to know to empathize? That's
Well,
another
I
question.
need to know way more
well,
than this, to be honest.
but here's the thing, though, and you know what, Devin, I'll give you that. I don't need to know a full backstory. I don't need to know a blow by blow of this character's entire life. Here's the thing, though. What little bit we are led to believe, or what little bit we know about this character, and the character development, or what we understand of her, is very subtle. It's very implied. Another issue that I have with this is that what we do know and what is implied is a character that is very hard to empathize with, that is very hard to find anything. I mean, what is likable, or more importantly, what is interesting about this character? She
Nothing.
is she
Well,
has obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, I mean,
She,
or she's
yes,
just very organized.
yeah.
Does the main character of a film need to be likable?
No,
no,
a character
but
doesn't
she
need to be
should be
likable. They
interesting.
need to be interesting. But I don't know
What
anything
is
about this woman.
Devin?
I watched it
What is
twice.
interesting about this character?
Yes, tell us.
Or
That's a good question. I think
Exactly.
she just represents. Well, no, I think she just represents like a lot of people. And
no, and
who kind of
I
go
don't I don't
underappreciated.
want to I don't
So
want
you're
this to
saying
come
she's an
across.
insert?
I would take that as such. I think she's representative of a lot of people in their day-to-day lives who
Okay.
go
So
overlooked, and I do
no,
think that that is important to have
and
on
I
film.
don't want this to come across like I'm shitting on the film, and in turn shitting on you, because that's not what I'm
No,
getting
and I don't take that either because I know you had your shit earlier, so that's fine.
at. Yes.
I'm
Um,
gonna
but
say something real quick.
here,
If it's alright, Steven, you can go on if you want.
yeah, yes. Go ahead. I have one other thing to say, but
It,
go ahead, Ian.
I'm gonna say something a little controversial, and that I've kind of mentioned before that I'm not the biggest fan of French cinema, and I think one of the biggest reasons I'm not a fan of French cinema is that they have this weirdly cynical approach to a lot of their movies, where they want to be movies but they also hate B movies at the same time and want to remind the audience that they hate B movies in the process. I think a big reason why I like films like Amelie and Man Bites Dog so much is that they unabashedly love B movies. Like, there's no cynicism behind the production at all. Like, yeah, sure, they're very different tones.
Those also came out much later than this.
That's true. But I think like this period of French cinema really puts me off because it has this very cynical, hateful, spiteful attitude towards the approach of cinema as well, as a
Well,
language and as an art
the
form.
I
I
think they had a very much a love-hate relationship with, like, American cinema in particular, like, film noir is film noir because it was French film essayists, notably Jean-Luc Godard, that saw these American gangster films from the 1930s and 40s after the ban was lifted, and they saw them all in succession. They were able to see these themes. That's when Godard got into filmmaking. And I'm not personally huge on Godard, though I understand and appreciate his significance and role in the film, in the film world and zeitgeist. I do need to see more of his stuff to really appreciate it, but it is him kind of lampooning these films a little bit and really deconstructing their narratives and such. Though I don't get a lot from that personally. And I do think these films were trying to find their own voice in a sense of they're they're trying to find their own way of expressing things apart from everyone else, and that had some mixed results. But they were very influential one way or the other.
Yeah,
well,
and the problem
it,
I have with this film in particular is that the entire time I was just thinking during my second watch that like this could have been a play. This could have been a documentary. I could have read this in a book and I would have lost absolutely nothing. I feel like those are some of the worst cases of movies in my opinion where they just refuse to use the cinematic language in any interesting way beyond just trying to get a response out of the audience and purposely being slow and foreboding. But you could have done that in other like settings and other like if you want to capture the feeling of an audience, that's fine. But you could have done so for a play. You could have done so for a documentary. It feels like it
What
just
would
hates being a movie, in my
what
opinion, and
would
that's why it
have
bothers me so much.
what do you think would have improved the story if it was in another medium, such as a play?
Such a well, I think like it could have improved as a play because like it could be interesting seeing how the set connects together for starters. I feel like the acting definitely could have been more natural in a play like setting. And the feeling of entrapment I think would be even stronger as well. Like you can't capture a feeling of entrapment in film as easily as you can in play. Like plenty of directors
Yes, you
have done
can.
so very well. Yeah, absolutely you can. But in a film
Like
like
the
this,
whale kind of does this to some extent. It's almost
yeah,
like a modern rendering of this type of thing, but with an overweight man rather than a woman.
that's true.
Um,
But The Whale, I think that film's better. And even though I have major problems with the writing, it's at least an actual like character study. It's at least like an interesting exploration of different themes. It goes somewhere with its story beyond just showing the mundanity of her life. Like people say, like this film's boring, and I don't want to use that as an excuse. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is boring, but that's also one of my favorite movies. I love that film to death because it has actual characters and an interesting mystery behind it, and it does something with its mundanity beyond just insisting on its importance. I'm gonna be honest. I watched this film a second time. I tried finding something to like, but I couldn't do it. And I feel like for the AFI to pick this as the number one film, even if they're going for a feminist option, great, that's fine. You could have picked Portrait of a Lady on Fire. You could have picked Raw. You could have picked Raised the Red Lantern or The Handmaid. There are so many infinitely better feminist movies than this one, and it just feels like a classic case of picking a random classic film out of a hat that just happens to be about relevant subject matter, just plastering it to a wall and crowning yourself for it. That's my review of Jeanne Dielman,
well,
everybody.
here, here's my thing, and I want to say this. I want to jump in here because I fucking love Jean-Luc Godard. I love, well, I mean, I love his '60s work before he became a Marxist in the '80s and kind of crawled up his own ass. Um, rest in peace. What a Chad. No, I mean, I love Jean-Luc Godard. I love Lars von Trier. Lars von Trier is someone who is consistently interested in deconstructing what it means to be a film. You look at something like Dogville, which the entire film is shot on a single sound stage, and it's this very minimalistic design. I love shit like that. Um, I I wanted to connect with this film, and normally there are films that I will watch and I won't get anything out of them, or I maybe there's something to where I don't agree with the consensus. I have my own issues for whatever reason, but I can at least look at those films and say, okay, I get it. Like, I get what people see in this. I understand why it's not resonating with me, but I understand how someone could walk away from this film and get something that I'm not getting. I don't get that from Jeanne Dielman. I don't understand what people are seeing in this. And I think, to me, we haven't even talked about the ending. This sort of reveal that.
Speaking of Lars von Trier.
I thought the ending, I really thought the ending brought it home, because I'll admit there were times where I was really, kind of not quite getting the point of the film and I was distracted. But the fact that she kind of snaps under pressure of just these, I think just her life just being underappreciated. Like, her relationship with her son kind of hit home, where she doesn't really seem to appreciate him, or no, he doesn't appreciate her. Um, and there's just like no interaction kind of between them at all, really, besides just like what's basic routine. There's just like these movements that are just kind of expected. And I feel like it's a woman who's just very subtly cracking under the pressure of her whole life and existence just not meaning
I,
anything, or not,
I,
or not just her whole life just not, you know becoming what it should be. And then she tries to do something about it, and she ends up killing this guy. Oh, he just dipped out.
Oh,
no, uh, sorry, technical difficulties. No, I honestly, Devin, I fundamentally disagree. I think that the ending here, this sort of reactionary murder of the first person that she sees that happens to be a man, I honestly think it's laughable.
I
mean,
think it was so. I don't know. I just feel like it was
I
a
didn't think
desperate attempt to be edgy.
well, no, I like the last shot where she's just sitting there with blood in her hands, and she realizes her life is over, and she
I
doesn't know what
I
to do
mean,
about it. She's
this is
frozen
a
with anxiety throughout, like, that whole scene, and she knows that inevitably it's just gonna, come to a head. She's gonna be found out,
Yeah,
and
but I mean, the
that
thing
I wish
is,
I could.
that stayed with me more
this
than
is a
anything.
film that is priding itself on, or at least people are interpreting it as
Yes, I
some
think it's
kind
all
of
people interpreting it.
feminist masterpiece. Even though Chantal Ackerman herself said she does not consider this a feminist film, she does not consider herself a feminist filmmaker. She considers herself a woman who makes films.
Mhm.
So, for me, people to come, 40 years later and say, "Oh, this is a feminist film," I think this is an example of the worst kind of feminism.
I
This
agree.
is the most privileged, liberal, white woman feminism. It
I
is
agree
centered around
wholeheartedly.
solely the experience of this one woman who I just
I
I don't know. Maybe it is a reflection of me, but I just could not stand this film. I
I
really,
see. Yeah. I think this
and I mean,
movie. I think this movie holds a mirror up to a certain segment of society and life, and what people see in it is
well, but I
a
don't.
reflection of that.
But see, that's so dangerously close to the idea that because it's a reflection of ourselves, if I don't like it, that implies that I am somehow a bad person.
Yeah, I
And
never have
I
been a big fan of that mentality.
It's not that you're a bad person necessarily. It's that there may be just some certain things that maybe we need to reflect on more. And
Sure, and I mean, but I mean, I was raised by a single mother. I understand what this film is trying to communicate. I don't think
It's
that it
just not doing it
communicates it
well.
well,
Yeah.
and I don't think that it has much to communicate. And I'm absolutely mind boggled by this sort of critical
There were
reappraisal
just
by what
so
people are
many
seeing in it.
films like this that are so much better, in my opinion. The
Yeah,
whole time I was just thinking of other movies I'd rather be watching. Like
yeah.
I watched like I'm thinking of ending things after this movie. That movie is a much better, no spoilers, a much better exploration of like the mundanity of being in a relationship and its own like twisted and fascinating way. It does something with the material beyond just kind of insisting upon itself. I'm sorry. If you want a great feminist film about like the struggles of being a woman in a certain period of time, watch Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Watch Raise the Red Lantern. This is a not movie. I'm giving it
from 5 to 7.
Yeah, I'm giving this one a 1 out of 10. Come at
Wow.
me,
I would also recommend We Don't Need to Talk About Kevin.
I haven't seen that yet. It's supposed to be really good.
I would recommend Vivre sa vie, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah, there's a lot.
I would recommend Tully. I think Tully's a great movie. That's kind of overlooked.
I haven't,
But
I haven't seen it.
I think you guys would appreciate that film more than this.
And I'm giving this a very generous 4 out of 10.
I'm gonna give it a 6.9 just for the jokes.
Jesus. Well,
Wow.
But honestly, I feel like, and this is what I was kind of just portraying that meme. If you throw a fucking active Twitch live stream chat on top of this, I think people will be a lot more engaged in what's happening.
Yeah,
Just have live commentary in a Twitch chat over like the side, and people would view this film a lot differently. And that's, I don't know, that's the society we live in now.
What a society.
People do not will not be subjugated to boredom, and I just find that fascinating.
Well, this podcast was anything but boring, guys. Thank you for those who tuned in. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming back, and Devin, as always, for helping supporting this channel and this episode. You guys are great. Happy to do another full year of episodes like this, guys. We have so much content coming up, including
January 26th. This will be our second and final episode of the month. For this episode, we looked at life and rebirth. We looked at the idea of the greatest films ever made and the New Year's resolution of, fantastic cinema and what it can mean and all of the good. And January 26th, well, we're not going to be looking at that. so Death and Rebirth, or the In Bad Taste trilogy. We're going to be reviewing John Waters' Pink Flamingos.
Oh, no.
Yes.
We're going to be reviewing Movie 43.
Oh, God. Are you kidding me?
To top it off, we're going to
Jeanne Dielman wasn't bad enough?
To top it off, we're going to be looking at my personal recommendation. That is Dan Aykroyd's 1991 Nothing But Trouble, which I am encouraging you all to go in blind.
I don't want to hear anybody say the word boring on the next one.
No, these films are anything but boring. Don't worry.
Yeah. And with that, thank you all for tuning in. I will see you in 3 weeks, or what is it, 2 weeks? 3 weeks? It's the 29th.
I think that's 2 weeks.
But boring, nothing but trouble. Wow.
Yeah.
What a story, Mark.
All right. Have a good night, guys. Stay tuned for Conan. And is it Thursday or Tuesday or Saturday or what the fuck? Just have a good night, guys.
Good night, everybody.